Do you remember the first time that you saw a movie or read a book that had a great plot twist at the end? The one that sticks out most in my mind is The Sixth Sense. Now, if you didn't see this movie 20 years ago, and yes, it did come out 20 years ago, this young boy, Cole Sear, is haunted by a dark secret. He sees ghosts. Cole is frightened by visitation from those around him with unresolved problems who appear to him in the shadows. He's too afraid to tell anybody about his anguish, except for the child psychologist, Dr. Malcolm Crowe. As Crowe tries to uncover the truth about Cole's supernatural abilities, the consequences for both the client and the therapist are a jolt that awakens them both to something unexpected. Now, I would say, spoiler alert, but it's 20 years old. If you were going to see it, you were going to see it. The plot twist is that Dr. Crowe has been dead the entire time and working through his own issues. I can remember seeing this moment, watching it for the first time, and being amazed at the plot twist. It was so powerful, so thought-provoking, so ingenious. But then I went back to watch it again, and really the suspense was gone. I knew the plot twist, and I couldn't go back to seeing the movie without that twist in my mind. I could watch it and see where the director and the writer had put hints about the truth all the way out throughout the movie. But my eyes had been opened to a new reality, or shall I say the real reality, if you can say that without it being redundant. And there was no going back. If I were even to watch The Sixth Sense with my kids, they would be experiencing that film for the first time, but there is no way I could go back to seeing it like I did the first time. My eyes had been opened to something new. One of the reasons that these plot twists are so powerful when they are done well is because as the movie or the book begins, we bring all our own preconceived notions into it with us. Our minds uses our memories to construct any details that seem to be missing or out of order in that world. What we have experienced, we bring into that world to interpret it. We understand everything from our own perspective, but then there are some times we are moved into seeing things in a new way. Much like the movie The Sixth Sense, we need to be jolted into a new awareness of the new reality that Jesus is showing us. It is when our points of view or ideas get challenged that it can be jarring, as it was for the disciples in our reading today. See, the feeding of the 5,000 is a story that's found in every gospel in our New Testament. Many scholars think the story is a formative story for the early Christians. We find Jesus in the desert leading a group of people, and now when they are hungry, he feeds them. It sounds very much like the story of Moses leading the Hebrews out of Egypt and then feeding them with manna from heaven in the desert. But what we have missed today by starting in verse 13 is the first 12 verses of this chapter, which tell of the death of John the Baptist. John the Baptist has been speaking out against Herod and the officials, but Herod is hosting an elaborate dinner party where his sister's daughter dances for them for entertainment, and it thrills him. In a mostly compromised state, Herod offers her anything she can ask for. She goes and confers with her mother, Herodias, who tells her to ask for John the Baptist's head on a plate. And so it comes to be. This news gets back to Jesus, and you can imagine that he is very troubled by it. His friend, colleague, but most of all cousin, has just been killed in the most horrific manner. He's probably in shock, in need of time to grieve, as we all would. I can imagine that if Jesus wept at the tomb of Lazarus, who is about to resurrect, you can imagine his grief in this moment of loss. It was then that he told his disciples that he wanted to get away to a solitary place. a time alone to pray, to be with his heavenly Father, and to grieve. So they go across the lake by boat. But the crowd followed Jesus on land. When they finally dock their boat on the other side, the crowd is there waiting for Jesus, wanting Jesus to heal them, to comfort them, to fulfill their needs. And if Jesus would have been like me, he would have sent them all away, saying that he had just lost a loved one and was not in the mood to care for any of them. But he isn't. The text tells us that he was moved with compassion. The Greek word there really means he was moved in his bowels. This deep concern for those people that had chased him around a lake. As the night arrives, the disciples think they have come up with a way to disperse the crowd. They're a long way from any villages where they could get food for such a large group. So they tell Jesus to send the people away so they can go get food, and Jesus can finally have a moment alone. The disciples had discovered the need. Jesus, recognizing that they had discovered the need, tells the disciples that they should feed them. Jesus tells the disciples they have 5,000 people before them ready for a meal. And they retort, "We only have 5 loaves and 2 fish." It is in this moment that Jesus asks the disciples to see the world through God's economy. He asks them to bring whatever they have. And Jesus takes it, he blesses it, breaks it, and sends it out to the people. God's economy is more resourceful than any other. The disciples had seen the need of the people. The people needed to be fed, but rather than to look to fulfill the people's needs, they looked to their own, or maybe even altruistically, to the need of their rabbi, trying to disperse the crowd so that Jesus could be alone. They knew what it took to feed banquets and people at feasts. They'd seen how many animals that were brought in for these kinds of moments. They'd seen people prepare for days for lavish banquets. And what could they do on this deserted countryside? But Jesus takes their misconstrued identity or idea and turns it into ministry. One where the disciples see the economy of God, where so little can be used to such great ends. I love how N.T. Wright talks about this passage when he says, "Think through how it happened. Being close to Jesus has turned into a thought of service. Jesus takes the thought, turns it inside out, and gives it back to us as a challenge. In puzzled response to the challenge, we offer what we've got. Nothing seems adequate, but the same happens. He takes it, blesses it, and breaks it, and gives it back to us. And our job is to now give it to everyone else. This is how it works whenever someone gets close enough to Jesus to catch a glimpse of what he is doing and how they can help. We blunder in with our ideas. We offer uncomprehendingly what little we have. Jesus takes ideas, loaves and fishes, money, a sense of humor, time, energy, talent, love, artistic gifts, skill of word, quickness of eye or fingers, whatever we have to offer. He holds them before his Father with prayer and blessing, and then breaking them so that they are ready to use. He gives them back to us to give those who need them. My friends, we pray this prayer so often when it comes to our prayer of dedication. We ask God to take our tithes and our offering and use them to fix the world, to heal the sick, to bring justice and peace. These gifts seem so small, but they offer great relief to the world. But it's not just our treasures, but our talents, our abilities, our ideas, and our gifts that we can offer to God. God uses them all, even when they're not great, to make amazing impact on the kingdom of heaven. We go from seeing God do miraculous things with 5 loaves and 2 fish to disciples out in a boat. They're in the midst of the wind and the waves crashing all around them. After the disciples have now ministered to the people, Jesus sends them back out on the boat as he dismisses the crowd. Jesus is finally alone to take time that he is so desperately needed to pray and to grieve. You can imagine that Jesus has seen the storm coming as he wakes, as he sees the clouds form around the lake. Jesus sees the disciples in need. Now I want to pause for a moment and say the people and scholars have debated for years on whether or not these miracles actually occurred. I know I have my opinion, and I assume you probably have yours. But I think more important than the argument or the debate is what the author is trying to tell us about who Jesus is. Let me give us a little background on what the sea represented in the ancient Hebrew culture. The sea is where evil and darkness, chaos and threat, the unknown came from. It was the untamable place. Especially the Sea of Galilee, storms could come up upon you quickly and be ferocious. At least 1/3 of the disciples knew this firsthand because they were fishermen. So not only was the sea a place of spiritual distress, but it was a place of real physical harm. See, it is into that framework we get the story of Jesus walking on the water to find his disciples struggling against the wind. The word that the author uses here is batter or torment, which is usually found in stories of demon possession earlier in Matthew's gospel. I think the author really wants us to see that the sea is tormenting them as much as the demons had tormented the man who was running around naked in the cemetery just a few chapters before. It is in the midst of these dangers, Jesus comes meandering out to them, unconcerned with the winds and the waves. It is here that Peter wants to do what the rabbi is doing, to get out of the boat and walk on the water. When Jesus responds to Peter, he uses the word simply, come. This is how Jesus has called his disciples to wander in the wilderness with him, to be a part of what he was doing in this world. He simply said to them, come and follow me. Peter walks on the water for just a moment, then gets distracted by the winds and the waves. We can think of the story as individuals. Let's take a moment at first, though, and picture this as our world. We are like the disciples who are in the boat. We have witnessed Jesus' power. We have heard his teachings and prayed his prayers. But now we find ourselves, professional fishermen, being battered by a headwind, struggling to make any headway. But these winds and waves are not the ones that we find on our lakes, but rather all around the world. It is the scarcity, hunger, alienation, and fear that are all symptoms of an unjust political and social and economic systems. These are just but a few of the winds and the waves in our modern world. We have discovered so much in our world, learned so much, invented so much, yet we are still without power to do many of the things that really matter. We have invented wonderful machines for making war, but nobody yet has found one that will make peace. We've put people on the moon, but we can't put food in all the hungry bellies of our children. We have listened to the songs of the whales sing from the ocean's floor, but we can't hear the crying of the human soul in the next street. Then metaphorically, there's a shimmering on the water, is a strange figure walking towards us. Much of our world knows at least a little about Jesus, but he seems like a ghostly figure, a mirage of fantasy, unrelated to our problems. Some find him frightening. Others wish he'd go away and leave us alone. Even those who believe in him, as the disciples did, don't know what to expect of him. But he seems to be doing the impossible. And sometimes people get the idea that it would be good to copy him if we could only. Some people set off with this aim of doing just that, to bring his love, his power, his peace, and his hope to a needy world. But when they let their eyes drop for a moment to the waves, they see the roughness of the world around them, the relentlessness of the wind and the waves. And it seems like one person alone against the elements. That's what it often feels like when you're trying to bring God's love and healing power to the wild night of the world. That's when we need to hear once more Jesus' words, a combination, as so often, of rebuke and encouragement. Is this really how much faith you have? Why all the doubt? The moment when we are most strongly tempted to give up is probably the moment when help is, if we only knew it just a step away. My friends, it's like we all are walking on the water in our discipleship journey. We have heard the good news of Jesus Christ and his kingdom. We have seen his justice and his peace and his mercy and love. We have experienced it in our own lives. But can we see it all around us in the ways in which this world clings to injustice, violence, and revenge? We have seen the winds and the waves in our world. We've seen the wars rage around us. We've seen the families break apart. We've seen the most vulnerable people be used for others' profits. We've seen too often the systems of racial injustice all around us. We see pictures of the polluted oceans filled with plastic, and we truly wonder if refusing a straw at lunch is really making any difference at all. My friends, I could go on and on. I want to do so much to bring Christ's love, justice, and peace. But then I start to look at the wind and the waves around me. I look at how little I can offer, only my 5 loaves and 2 fish, and I think there is no way that this can make a difference. When we draw these 2 stories together, we find Jesus showing the difference between God's economy and the world's, as well as the way that Jesus saw the winds and the wave versus the way that we see them. Jesus saw the same waves as Peter did, but Jesus did not sink. Jesus sees the same problems in our world that we see, but he hasn't forsaken us and he hasn't given up. I know I often see the problems of this world and I think of them as too big, and I just want to give up. There's no way that we have the means or the ability to fix these huge systemic issues. I feel like one of the disciples in the boats, oaring against the wind, feeling like I'm not making any headway. And then I hear the words of Jesus, "Why do you doubt?" The word doubt there, Matthew later uses in the gospel when talking to the disciples right after Jesus was resurrected. And it carries the sense of being in 2 places or being of 2 minds. Jesus has shown his disciples and us over and over again how when we bring what little we have, great can be done. See, the source of the feeding is God, but the resources are human. The work of the disciples, the bread of human effort, is honored and magnified by Jesus because God's power is loose in our world and is utterly unlike any of the human empires. Faith involves changing our minds, our imagination of reality, and entails crossing boundaries. This is still at the heart of Christian practices in times of violence, scarcity, and alienation. What I know is even when I've seen Jesus' power in taking what little we have and offering it, I sometimes have a hard time remembering it. Unlike the ending to The Sixth Sense, I often forget what God is capable of in our world and in our lives. Our job as the church is to bring whatever we have, whatever gifts, talents, treasures, abilities, and offer them to God for the work of the kingdom. And in that, Jesus will take what little we offer, even in the midst of the greatest storm around us, and magnify them for God's glory. When we are faced with the daunting task of hunger, justice, violence in this world, may we remember that Jesus does not call us to be the one who fixes everything, but he calls us to see the world through his eyes and offer what we have that he may magnify it. My friends, the winds of injustice may be in our face. The waves of violence might be buffeting us in the world. But may we look to Jesus, saying, all I have is 5 loaves and 2 fish. But Jesus will say one word to us, come and join me in my mission. And may we go. Amen.